Hi everyone, Mike again with MEG Motors. Today we're going to be working on replacing the fork seals on this set of forks off of a 1997 CR250. These are Shoa 47mm forks and they're dual chamber. So dual chamber as opposed to open chamber means that there's actually two separate chambers in the fork that have oil in them. There's an inner chamber that controls the damping, rebound and compression damping for the fork, and then there's an outer chamber that also has oil in it. It's primarily for lubrication of the fork and bottoming resistance. The problem with these forks is they're leaking. They're working okay, so there's a good chance that we wouldn't necessarily have to change the oil in the inner chamber, but most of the time if I'm going into the fork, I'm going to service the inner chamber anyway. If your only goal is to stop a fork seal leaking, you can replace just the fork seals without getting into the inner chamber and still fix the fork seal leaking problem. But if you really want to service the fork, you really ought to get into the inner chamber as well. So we're going to go through the tear down of these forks and how we service the inner and the outer chambers and get these back together and see if we can stop them from leaking. So I'm going to reset the camera and we'll get started taking these forks apart. All right, so we're going to get started on the tear down of these forks. There's a couple of tools that are nice to have if you are going to be doing these more than once. This is one tool. It's nice to have. This is for taking the top of the fork loose. You'll see where that's used in just a minute. And then this tool is used for holding the dampening chamber, or the dampening rod out so you can take another part of the fork apart, and you'll see where these are used later. These tools aren't that expensive, and they'll pay for themselves with the first fork seal replacement that you do. So it'll make your life easier if you have them, but you can probably get by without them if you want to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the adjusters completely out. And so I like to count them first before I take them out so I can set them back to where they were before. So we're going to count this one, we're going to turn it in until it stops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it was 6 turns out from fully stopped. So we're going to turn it all the way out now. All right, and same thing on the bottom, the rebound adjuster. We're going to turn it in until it stops. That one doesn't feel like it's moving quite right. No, there's where it stopped. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so both of those fully turned out. We're going to use this first wrench like I talked about. We're going to take this top nut loose right here. And we're going to turn it all the way out. Till we can separate the fork. And so in this step, we're going to drain the outer chamber. Like I talked about, there's an inner chamber. This is the inner chamber here. And there's oil in the outer chamber. We're going to drain that oil out. Now there's always a little bit of oil that gets stuck in this opening for the inner chamber as well. And then we'll just drain out the outer chamber. Fork seals are a messy job, in my opinion. It's one of the messier jobs that we do. And I don't know that there's a way to get around that. There's lots of places with lots of oil, and it kind of drips and drains the whole time you're working on them. All right, so that's good enough for now. We're going to put this back on just hand tight, just to keep it from leaking on us some more. And now we're going to take this nut loose. This nut loose down here at the bottom. It's 21 millimeter. And I like to use typically a 1/2 inch extension through the axle hole to hold everything in place while I take that loose. I'm going to take that all the way loose as well. You can typically tell when it's all the way loose because you'll hear it count or snapping back on the threads like that. All right, and so this is where we need this tool. So we're going to push down on the fork leg, and as we do, this nut is going to extend from the fork, and then we're going to hook this tool under it. I'm not sure you'll be able to see that with the camera angle that we have, but I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. So yeah, so that's where this tool goes, and we need to take this nut off of the shaft, and so we have to expose down here. There's 2 flats where a 17 millimeter wrench goes, and we'll use that to take this nut off. And once we get this nut off, there's a shaft in here that transfers the adjustment of the rebound damper up into the inner chamber. So we'll just take that shaft out, and then we'll take our tool off. And so next, we're going to go back up top here, and we're going to take this nut back off. This is where things can get messy again. And so with that nut loose, I can take the inner chamber completely out of the fork. Like I was telling you in the beginning of this video, this chamber doesn't always have to be serviced. This doesn't have anything to do with fork seals that are leaking. This is strictly to control the damping of the fork, and it doesn't always have to be serviced. So the way that we test to see if it needs to be serviced is to fully compress it and then let it extend on its own. And if it's in good shape, this rod should extend fully out to the stop. So this one needed just a little bit extra. So we'll push that down again, and we'll try it again. So again, it stops just a little bit short of fully extended. I've heard 2 different schools of thought on that. Some say that it absolutely has to extend fully on its own. And I've heard others say that sometimes there's just enough internal friction and not enough force that it won't extend all on its own. I've had forks where I've tried to get it to extend all the way, and it just wouldn't, and never noticed any adverse effect from that. So as long as it moves smoothly and it extends most of the way out, then servicing of the inner chamber, in my opinion, is optional. But we're going to go ahead and service this one and see if we can make it any better. But again, if you're just trying to stop a leak, you don't necessarily have to go into this. One thing that we do need to do though is we need to adjust this nut. We're going to turn this nut all the way down. And so when we put that, when we put the fork back together and we put that rebound adjuster mechanism back on here, we want to make sure that it bottoms against the shaft and not against the nut. And so if this nut is too far out and you put that on and don't do anything about it, it'll bottom here instead of here, and then it won't adjust correctly. So we want to make sure that this is all the way down before we put that back together. All right, so I'm going to set that aside for just a minute, and we're going to do just the fork seal replacement. and show you what you have to do if all you need to do is stop a fork seal leak. And so we're going to go back to the inner chamber, or the outer chamber, and we're going to take the fork spring out of it. So here's the fork spring. I'm going to put this in a drain bucket down here. Again, messy part. And try to drain just a little bit more oil out of it. And we're good. All right, we need to, this is where the fork seals are. And there's an outer dust seal here first, so we're going to knock that loose. It typically comes out pretty easy. Like that. And then down inside here, there's a wire retainer. And so we're going to reach in with a screwdriver. We're going to pop that retainer. I may not have the right screwdriver. There we go. This retainer right here comes out. And then this next part looks a little violent, but it's the way to take them apart. So we're gonna extend this fork and it'll come to a stop right there. We're gonna do it a couple of times, pulling it pretty hard, and see if we can pop this fork apart. Sometimes it comes apart in one pop, sometimes it takes a few. So let's see if we can get this one to come apart. There we go. All right. So here's our leaking fork seal. This is the seal that leaks right here. But to get that off, we have to take a couple more pieces off. There's a couple of bushings here. So we're gonna find the slot in this. I'm gonna open that bushing up a little bit, and we're gonna slide it right off. I'm gonna take a look at it. This is Teflon on the outside. I wanna make sure that that all looks good, and it does. Then we have this bushing here, which also has Teflon, but on the inside. And it looks good as well. Then we have a washer. We have our seal. And we have our dust seal right here. And so this is the order everything goes back on. So we'll clean this up a little bit. All right, so here's our new fork seal and our new dust seal. And the dust seal pretty much goes on, it's pretty obvious how it goes on. The fork seal has springs, seal springs on both sides. Hopefully you can see that spring. There's one in there. This deep opening goes up into the outer chamber. So make sure you get that in the right way. And we have to be careful when we put this back together that we don't cut the seal on this edge right here. This edge where this bushing came out is very sharp, and so are the openings to these two holes right here. And so we want to make sure that we don't cut the seal. And so to protect against that, I will wrap the top of the fork in a thin layer of masking tape. It doesn't need to be much, just enough to protect that seal. And so we'll put our new dust seal on first. Actually, I'm going to get a little bit of new fork oil. I'm going to lube up the inside of that. I'm going to put that back on the fork leg. I'm going to show you one other trick that I like to do. So when we put this fork seal on, sometimes they go in really easy. Sometimes you have to use a driver and drive them in. And what can happen when you're driving in a seal like this, so we'll be pounding on it from this side. If you pound on it, you can actually knock the garter spring out of the seal. And if that garter spring comes out, this seal is not going to seal. And so kind of an old school trick to stop that from happening is to pack the slot of the seal with a little bit of grease. And that way, if the garter spring tries to jump loose, it'll hit that grease and be less likely to come out of off of the seal completely. So with that done, a little bit of oil on the seal. Again, we're going to put this on with the large opening up. We're going to put that right over our fork and down the leg. All right, so now we can take the tape off. And we can put our washer on, put our bushing on, and put our other bushing on. So like I said earlier, sometimes the fork seals and the forks go back together with relatively little force, and sometimes they need a fair bit of force, and you need a fork seal driver. There's several of them out there. This is the one that I use from DRC, and it has adapters for multiple different sizes of forks. I've used this one for quite a while, and it works pretty good. I like it. And so we're going to pull out the right adapter for this fork, which is 47 millimeter. All right, so we're ready to try to put this one back together. So first thing we're going to do is slide the inner tube back in the outer tube, and we have to get this bushing to go down inside the fork. Let me see if you can see that. Let me raise the camera up just a little bit. So we got to get this bushing to go down inside that fork, and we can use that washer to help us a little bit. So we're going to put our fork seal driver on right here. I've heard that you can sometimes use like a piece of PVC pipe cut in half to take the place of this driver if you need to. If you're just doing one, that's fine. Oh yeah. So see, that one slid right in. They don't always do that. Sometimes they got to be driven in, but that one went back together quite easily, which is good. So I'm gonna let the spring come back out a little bit. And look to see, yeah, it looks like it went down in there well. All right, so next we have to get the seal itself to go down. Same kind of thing. I'm gonna push it down. Gonna put our driver on. I'm going to try to just push it in. It feels like it went in pretty well. So you can tell if it's in far enough. If you look in the recess here, and you can see the groove where this snap ring goes. Remember this snap ring we took off earlier. And so the final test is to try to put this snap ring in place. And if it'll snap into the groove like it's supposed to, you'll know that everything is back together the way that it's supposed to be. And there it went. I hope you heard that snap into place. But it did. It looks good. And so then we'll put our dust seal in place. Usually that goes in by hand. And so yeah, here we go. Our fork is back together with new fork seals. And like I said, if your only goal is to fix a leak, leaking fork seal, this is really all the work you need to do. You can put the inner chamber back in and close this back up, fill it with oil, like we're going to do a little later in this video, and you'll solve your leaking fork seal. We're going to move on to servicing the inner chamber, but if all you want to do is fix a fork leak seal and you don't want to mess with the inner chamber, you can skip ahead to the final assembly and see how this is put back together. All right, so if you've decided to service your inner chamber as well, we're going to go through that now. So we need a wrench again, if you have it. Again, it makes it easier. And we need a 32 millimeter socket or a wrench for this inner nut. And we're just going to take that loose. Once we have that all the way loose, we're going to compress the rod, and as we compress the rod, we'll see the nut rise up out of the fork chamber there. Hopefully we can see that. Let me adjust the camera. There we go. So yeah, as we pull the rod out, this piece rises up out of the fork, and then we can just pull it out. It comes out pretty hard sometimes, but just keep working on it, and it'll come out. And then you'll end up with this piece right here. And so you can set that aside for now. So now we're going to turn this inner chamber upside down. We're going to dump the oil out of it, and we're going to pump the rod a few times. It's going to pump some more oil out. All right, so that's good. And then we want to look at this inner damping mechanism and make sure, same thing we did before, these are Teflon coated bearings, and we want to make sure that the Teflon's in good shape, and these look really, really good. All right, I need to look up an oil spec, so I'm going to turn the camera off for just a minute. I'll be right back. Okay, so the specification for the oil in the inner chamber to start with is 180 cc's. And so I've measured that out in a cup. And so we're going to extend the rod all the way. Let me turn this camera up a little bit. So I'm going to extend the rod all the way, and I'm going to put my finger over these two holes on the side so I don't make more of a mess than I need to. And I'm going to pour 180 cc's of oil into the chamber. All right, and then we need to bleed the fork, or the damper. And so we're going to push this rod in and out a few times. And the manual says not to push it all the way. I like to push it all the way the first couple of times. And as you pull it back out, you'll feel it resisting the movement, and you'll even feel sometimes you can feel bubbles moving through the system. Once you've done it a couple times full stroke, you should only go about 10 inches, it says. And just keep moving it back and forth until you don't hear any more bubbles and you don't feel any more. The rod should extend smoothly and easily. Yeah, so that feels good. Doesn't usually take too many. All right, once you think you have it bled, it's time to finish putting it back together. And sometimes this can be the hardest part. So we're going to put this piece back in the outer chamber, and it's going to resist us because we've got too much oil in the fork. That's done on purpose. We're going to put that piece in, and then we're going to compress the fork one more time, and it's going to push out the excess oil. So we know we have too much oil in it, and it makes it difficult to put this piece in sometimes, but you just have to work at it. So we're going to push it like that, and then we're just going to have to push it as hard as we can and try to get the first threads to catch. There we go. All right, I'm going to move the camera so you can see this next part. Now this is another messy part. All right, so now that we have our inner chamber damper mechanism back in place, we're going to kind of cover up these holes lightly and we're going to compress the rod. And as we compress it, as we get near the end of the stroke, we're going to hear it break the seal in here and it's going to push oil out of these holes. At least it should. There it goes. Hopefully you can see that oil coming out already. I'm going to fully compress it. Let it come back. We'll do that one more time. And then we're going to dump the excess oil out of these holes. All right, so now that we have our chamber back together and full of oil and bled, we're going to run the same test we ran when we first took these apart. We're going to push this damper rod all the way up. We're going to let it extend. And we're going to see how far it goes. And so it actually does go farther now than it did before we took it apart and serviced it. We had about probably 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches where it would extend further, but now it's pretty much going all the way. So I think we've helped this damper a little bit. Yeah, so very good. I'm happy with that. All right, so with that all back together now, we're ready to finish the assembly of the fork. And so we're going to start with the outer chamber. We're going to put our spring back in. And then we're going to put our damper rod back in. Then we're going to extend the tube all the way. Tighten the cap back on. We're going to use our tool like we did when we took it apart to set the rod. Just like that. We're going to put this piece back in. And we're going to put our rebound adjuster back in place. And this is where I was talking about it's important that we reset that nut. So I'm going to screw this down until it gets hand tight. And then if you look, you can see that nut has not contacted this piece yet, but it's bottomed out on the shaft. And that's what we need to make sure happens. And so we're going to take our wrench again, and then we're going to tighten this the rest of the way. So when we tighten it now, it's going to basically back this nut off until it contacts the rebound adjuster. All right, we're going to take our tool off. We're going to tighten this nut the rest of the way. All right, so that completes the major assembly. We still need to put oil in the outer chamber. So I'm gonna have to look that spec up again too. So I'm gonna turn the camera off, I'll be right back. All right, so the book calls for 13 ounces of oil in the outer leg. And so I've measured that out, and all we gotta do is pour that in right here. Then we'll pull our fork leg back up and tighten all of this for the last time. I usually say final tightening of all of this for when the fork is back in the bike. It can be hard to hold these fork legs and get that snugged up until you put it back in the triple tree. So yeah, so that's it. That finishes the servicing of this fork. Inner and outer chambers, if you followed both. If you only wanted to replace the fork seals, hopefully you skipped ahead of that part. But yeah, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Check my playlist. There's more videos out there about small engine repair and motorcycle repair. And yeah, I hope this encourages you to do some work on your own. This job is not that difficult, especially if you're only replacing the fork seals, not servicing the inner chamber. It's not that difficult, and with just a few special tools, I think almost anybody can do it. So yeah, thanks for watching, and stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next video.